Before we jump into this podcast, let's just have a first word from our sponsors, NordVPN, the fastest VPN in the world and an absolute essential travelling companion. You can use NordVPN on 10 devices with just one account, easily switching your virtual location to access apps and websites in other countries. But if you're out of the country, make sure that you've got NordVPN to be able to use your subscriptions and watch the live sport that you might miss. If you're at home, use it to see if you can save money with products that might be cheaper in another region. Go to nordvpn.com/Manchester to get 4 extra months on the 2-year plan. The link is also in the podcast description.
Hello and welcome along to the latest episode of the Samuel Luckhurst Show from the Manchester Evening News. My name is George Smith and I'm joined as always by Mr. Samuel Luckhurst himself. Samuel, good to see you as always. How are you?
Yeah, fine, thank you, George. Fine, thank you. How are you?
Yes, not bad at all. Thank you. Very well. Before we dive into today's podcast, we want to offer a shout out to one of our podcast sponsors, NordVPN, who offer the fastest VPN in the world, and it is an essential traveling companion. To get the best discount off your NordVPN plan, go to nordvpn.com/Manchester. Our link will give you 4 extra months on the 2-year plan. There's no risk with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. The link can be found in our podcast description box. Samuel, in the blink of an eye, pre-season done and dusted. It's flown by. It drew to a close on Saturday with a rather uninspiring draw, to say the least, against Fiorentina. Not the greatest game we've watched this summer by any stretch, but another good workout for the Manchester United players nonetheless. What did you make of it?
Yes, I don't imagine we'll be reflecting too much on the game because, as you said, it I suppose ended how it started with that Leeds game. It was slightly more watchable on Saturday, but it was, I suppose it was things around the game rather than what happened in the game that were more interesting in terms of the identity of who was starting up front, the fact that the only senior striker available didn't get a kick, which was telling, given that a new striker is now in the building, and there was nothing to glean from how United played, what they did. I'd be extremely worried for Ruben Amorim's state of mind if Mason Mount was starting up front against Arsenal this week. I suspect he won't be, but I didn't quite understand that experiment, which only lasted 45 minutes. In the past 2 games, there have been 3 different strikers for United who filled in there at various points, and those 2 players are not out-and-out strikers. Obviously, Hojlund came on in the second half against Everton and Atlanta, but Mount, Cunha and Mbeumo all having stints up top. I don't think really was particularly beneficial. I think if you're playing that system, and given how well United played the majority of their time on tour, it's more logical and beneficial, as I say, to have an actual striker up top. But we'll get on to the situation with Hojlund shortly. Mbeumo was the standout. I thought, I enjoyed watching him against Everton in Atlanta in that first half. I thought he looked pretty good then. He played at a similarly good level in the first half on Saturday until he moved up front for the second half, and there's already a pretty good, there's a good connection between him and Ahmad. And before Mbeumo signed, I was of the opinion that he should be on the wing and Ahmad should be as the 10. Obviously, Amorim sees it the other way around, which is perfectly understandable given Mbeumo's goals record last season. But I think it is something that could be quite seamless. You can see them switch in. Ahmad, when he gets on the ball, he wants to drive into the penalty area. That's what United need to demand of their wingers in this team, and he's certainly going to do that for them. I think Ahmad's only one of 2 players who've actually started all 5 pre-season games, which speaks volumes of how important he is to the team and what Ruben Amorim thinks of him as well. And he's had a very good 18 months really at United, from that finally getting those opportunities under Erik ten Hag, and then having a couple of good pre-seasons. He had quite a good pre-season last year as well, and he's a pretty integral player now in this new system. And it was quite apparent in Amorim's first game against Ipswich that Ahmad played on the right wing. He's the only winger of the quintet who Amorim has trusted to play in that wide role rather than as one of the 2 number 10s. And of course, those other 4, one of them has left on loan. I hope for United's sake, and I'm sure United hope for their own sake, that Jadon Sancho, Anthony and Alejandro Garnacho will not be at the club in a month's time, but easier said than done. So that also reflects so well on Ahmad, what a good hard worker he is, what a good lad he is, what a good player he is. So that, apart from those two, really, and Fernandes as well, but we take it for granted, don't we? Just how good he is, and he was good again to watch on Saturday. He's still the main man wherever you play him, and he's always trying to make things happen. There were a couple of moments I thought that really spoke volumes of his influence as a captain. And in the second half, quite late on, he was cajoling Patrick Dorgu to show a bit more intensity, and I understood that because I thought Dorgu was at the risk of regressing after having such a good tour. And then about a minute later, Dorgu is sprinting into the penalty area and almost making something happen. And that's an example there of when Fernandes speaks, teammates listen. And I know in the past there have been some attempts to question his form of leadership, but as far as I've been concerned, I think he's always been a really good captain for United, and he's practically been the captain for 3 years now, rather 2 years officially, but it was 3 games into Ten Hag's first season that Harry Maguire was dropped and Fernandes assumed the armband. And let's face it, he's been a leader ever since he came to United, directing teammates, dictating the play quite often, having such a profound influence on that team, whether it's their league position or their performance level. And certainly after the 4 signings were paraded, the team followed out soon after. Sesko had been introduced, and there was a chorus of Bruno, and that again, it just shows how grateful United fans are that Fernandes has decided to stick around for another season, because he's going to be absolutely crucial, whether he's playing as the 10, playing in midfield, possibly playing up front. I suspect that won't happen given the other options there, but he's going to be absolutely vital to how United perform this season.
It most definitely is, and we saw him, didn't we, throughout pre-season, interchanging between the number 8 position, the number 10 position. We saw him as one of the 2 8s at the weekend, alongside Casemiro. Probably didn't have the greatest of games, to be fair to him. But just going back to Mbeumo, Samuel, him and Ahmad did link up really nicely, particularly in the first half. I thought they got 31 goals between them last season. This could be the beginning of a really promising and attack-minded partnership for Manchester United that could potentially be key to the season they want to have.
Well, they're 2 attack-minded players, and that's what I like about the balance there, because there were quite a few games last season where Amrim literally picked 8 defensive players in a team, and overloading a team with defensive players is not going to help any team really, unless you are geared to play that way, and that system is not geared to play that way. Some people may look at it and think that's a back 5, it looks defensive. A different way of looking at it is you've got a back 3 there, and you've got a defensive midfielder there, and the wingers are wingers. They're not wing backs. The identity of those 2 players now, you've got Dorgu, who's a left back by trade, but he is developing into a winger, and he needs to develop into a winger. Ahmad is a winger who has played as a playmaker. He is an out-and-out attacker. So it's a lot more attack-minded, and the balance is a lot better. And if you've got 3 centre-backs, a defensive midfield, and a goalkeeper as your 5 defensive players in the team, that's what I want to see as a journalist who wants to be entertained by Manchester United, never mind the supporter, but I think it's what a supporter wants to see. And that's why the pre-season has been quite encouraging, because that balance has changed quite a lot from last season. I remember one game that sticks out. I wasn't at it. It was Ty who covered it for us, but the game in Romania, where I think Toby Collier started and Tyrone Marshall might even have started, and it just did not work, and it was 0-0 at half time. There were 2 changes made at the interval, which I think were Garnacho and Ahmad coming on, and that of course adjusted the balance massively, where it was so unnecessarily defensive minded to a more attack minded team. United had a good second half. They won 2-0. They scored a couple of good goals, and they ended up finishing in the top 8 of that Europa League table, which meant they automatically progressed to the round of 16. But you could tell that Amrim, he was agonising, and he he'd inherited these players, and he only had to deal with all he could deal with was what he had in front of him. But there were times where it felt like he was erring on the side of caution. And I know we don't really want to remember the Europa League final too much because it was such a dreadful game, but there were some very clear issues with the selections in that team. And I think one of them was that I'm pretty sure was Mazraoui. I think he was the right winger, wasn't he? Because Ahmad was one of the two teams with Mount. Hojlund was up front, and Hojlund couldn't hit a bar door at that time. And Fernandez, who'd played quite a lot of the period between the March International to the end of the season back as the number 10, suddenly dropped back into midfield because Ugarte was not cutting it. He was playing so badly. But I just thought the presence of Mazraoui, who had a good season, undeniably, with United, as your right winger, just sent out the wrong message. Now, in the end, was it decisive towards the game's outcome? No, not really. I mean, it was a dreadful goal that decided a dreadful game between two dreadful teams. But that was another example of Amorim not knowing to what balance to settle on at that point. And obviously, all the games the way United were preparing for games, they were geared towards the Europa League matches because that offered the possible salvation for their season. But he really did struggle to get it right, it felt like. And it's of course changed since then because they've just invested just over £200 million in 3 forwards. The emphasis, the priority is the attack. They are playing more attack-minded football, albeit in friendlies, relatively meaningless games. But if Dorgu can sustain his tour form when the competitive season starts, and you've got Mbeumo and Ahmad on that right-hand side, which I think is shaping up very nicely. Cunha, we've seen how good a player he is for Wolves. It's going to be a big ask for him to reach that level on a consistent basis for Manchester United, given the scrutiny and the expectation and what they want to achieve from their season. And Sesko is going to be one of the most under pressure players signings that United have ever made, as far as I'm concerned. When you consider everything and all the various factors and subplots, but the balance of the team and the squad is looking a lot better than it was last season. Which and if the balance is better, the chances of success have got to be higher.
Yep, most definitely, and we will move on to talking about Benjamin Sesko now, because we didn't really get the chance to record a podcast last week, so we've not really had a chance to speak about him until the deal sort of develops its latter stages and now is officially done. He is the third attacking signing, as you mentioned there, Samuel. The Ineos have spent a hell of a lot of money in assembling this new look forward line this summer. 2 proven Premier League operators, bit of a risk taken with Benjamin Sesko. We've both done pieces in the past week or so outlining the risks of this potential move. But as you said there, there's going to be a lot of pressure on his shoulders. But his record, all things considered for his age, is not too shabby to say where he's been.
What is it? 27 goals and 64 Bundesliga games. Like that's okay. It's modest. Is it decent? Maybe. Some would argue it's underwhelming for a player who was operating at, let's face it, a franchise team that are absolutely reviled in Germany, RB Leipzig, who finished 7th last season and had a dreadful Champions League campaign as well. So I think you can look at it one of two ways. I mean, the way he was introduced by the Old Trafford compare, it was like the most amount of goals for a player under the age of 21. I mean, there is not a stat out there that cannot make someone look flattering or look good, really, whether you're a footballer or whatever trade you're in. There's always going to be a stat that can make you look good. And with Sesko, I mean, it'll be fascinating to see how he gets on at United, because in terms of the subplots and the strands to it, I think it's fair to say that he's probably the 4th choice striker, given that they wanted Delap. They looked at Gyökeres, but Gyökeres wanted Arsenal, and Ollie Watkins was sounded out, or the possibility of signing Ollie Watkins was explored. There are only 2 strikers in my lifetime that Manchester United and Newcastle United have both gone for at the same time, as far as I'm aware. which were Alan Shearer in 1996 and Wayne Rooney in 2004. So that's the leading scorer in the Premier League era and the third highest scorer in the Premier League era, something like 468 goals between them in the Premier League. Wayne Rooney won literally everything at Manchester United over nearly 13 years. Shearer is still, I think, quite relatively widely and quite rightly regarded as possibly the best striker in England the past 30 odd years. If Sesko is mentioned in the same breath as those two, again in a different context, he will have done well. The fact he's been mentioned in the same breath as them now in that context heaps a hell of a lot of pressure onto him, given how esteemed those two players were. And you look at his development, going from Red Bull Salzburg to budding Champions League qualifiers to a Manchester club. Erling Haaland did that. Erling Haaland is, in goal scoring terms, he's a freak, really. Looks like he was built in a lab. He was built to score goals. Sesko, though, is going to be compared to him, and he's already been compared to him, probably unfairly, but they have taken an identical career path. And Sesko was born in 2003. He played in Austria, modest record in a Big Five European league, he then goes to Manchester United for a fee just over £70 million. Why does that sound familiar? It's because Manchester United did it 2 years ago with a player who was absolutely never, ever good enough to lead the line for Manchester United. So there's a risk of history repeating itself there. I'd say the distinction between Sesko and Hojlund is that Sesko was certainly a more renowned striker when he was a teenager, to the point that United wanted to sign him 3 years ago. And they valued him at £15 million. Salzburg wanted 30 million. 2 years later, United have spent more than double on him. So again, in terms of the pressure, that's just gathering. There's more pressure there. And, even if he scores against Arsenal on Sunday, you'll get some cynics saying, and I'm not saying I'm one of them, but it may have to get a mention if he does score, rather tongue-in-cheek. Anthony scored in his debut against Arsenal for Manchester United, but you would think that it wouldn't diminish Sesko's impact if he were to score. I remember thinking that day when Anthony did score against Arsenal, it was a strange one when we discussed it on the podcast the following day, because he scored, but other than that, there were clear issues with the way he went about the game, and I think we said, Leo, we can't knock him too much because he's just scored, but it wasn't as if the overall package was particularly impressive. If Sesko performs well and doesn't score, that would be more encouraging than scoring and looking a bit out of his depth for the rest of the game, which I thought was the case with Anthony on that day. But he scored. United won 3-1. I think it might have been their third or fourth win on the trot, having had such a dreadful start to that season with the 2 defeats to Brighton and Brentford. So it was pure positivity. It was uplifting, and you had to obviously channel that with coverage. But we did say on the podcast, I do remember, I think it was myself and Rich Fay, that he wasn't exactly impressive, but he did score, so you can't knock him too much. But here we are, a few years down the line. I think we've knocked him plenty of times. But Sesko, look, ultimately they needed a striker. There were a couple of colleagues on tour, rather naively, I think at the end of the tour we were having a discussion about it and the midfield situation. Absolutely, United need a midfielder, but some were saying, do they need a striker? Maybe they don't. Maybe they can get by it. No, they absolutely needed a striker. They just recorded minus goal difference in 2 seasons running. They needed someone up top. I don't want to see Cunha playing up top for United. Mason Mount up top was ridiculous. He's done next to nothing for United, playing in roles he's familiar with over the past 2 years, never mind a role that is completely alien to him. And Bumo, you want him playing off the striker. You don't want him playing as the striker. You need to have someone up there who is an out-and-out number 9. And Sesko is. He would not have been my choice, but in this market and this summer, there were a number of strikers who you just knew were going to be on the move and would appeal to United. And in the end, they've gone, as I said, their third or fourth choice. I don't think Ollie Watkins necessarily stood out as a striker that was definitely going to be on the move this summer. And let's face it, it looks like he'll just end up staying at Aston Villa because I think United was his last last opportunity of getting a move away. But Gyökeres, we all knew he was going to leave. We knew Liam Delap was going to leave. And everyone knew Benjamin Sesko was going to leave as well. And in the end, United have got one of those forwards, one of those strikers, and it's someone who's familiar to the director of recruitment, Christopher Vivell, because of course he used to work for the Red Bull Group at Salzburg and Leipzig. And it was interesting what Jason Wilcox said in the statement that was released about the data analysis. It made them convinced that Sesko was right, and of course a lot of clubs are going down that route now of just looking at data, which there must be something in it or a lot of things in it, otherwise they wouldn't do it. But I still, call me a Luddite, but I think if you go to a game, you watch a player in person, see how he interacts with players on the ball, off the ball, what's he like in the warm-up, what's he like away from the pitch. I think they are still, I don't think you can underestimate the importance of that. But with Sesko, it's not going to be boring. It's going to be just fascinating to see how he gets on, and he's going to have broad shoulders to shoulder a hell of a lot of responsibility and a hell of a lot of pressure. But he must back himself, because he's backed himself in the past, and this is a career path, I imagine, that he's had his eyes on for quite some time.
Yeah, he's certainly been attracting a lot of attention, hasn't he, in the last 2 or 3 years? I remember, Samuel, you did a piece, I think it was 3 summers ago now, where John Merton, the former United football director, met with his agent to sort of gauge the possibility of a move back then. So he's obviously been on the radar for a while, and I'll admit I've not seen a lot of him down the years, but there's obviously a player with very high potential there. Ruben Amorim said that he was very fond of his characteristics as well, which feels quite important. So it'd be interesting to see how he does slot in. But I suppose as well, Samuel, the difference between this situation, the Rasmus Hojlund deal 2 years ago, is that he's coming into a forward line where he's going to be supported by 2 Premier League proven players, 2 players both you and I have been very, very fond of in recent months in the build-up to them coming to United. It does feel quite exciting, this newly assembled front three. No guarantees it's going to work, but it feels fresh, and it just feels like there's something that potentially could be unleashed to really excite in the Premier League this season.
Oh, it is. I knew quite a good way into last season that United would want a number 10 and a striker. I didn't expect them to get 2 10s and a striker, but when you've got, it is a new front three, isn't it? And it's a front three that they would hope would stay there for at least 5 years. It's still a big ask. What are the chances of that happening? But that's certainly the intention. Those 3 players individually have excellent attributes. Cunha and Mbeumo are familiar to us just by virtue of us watching the Premier League and then playing on these shores. Sesko less so. There's no point. The fact that Sesko, from what I saw of him at the Euros last year, I wasn't convinced by him. But that's irrelevant. You can't judge a player on a major tournament. There've been some clubs who, and United did it a couple of times after Euro 96 with Poborski and Jordi Cruyff. But if you sign a player on the back of a major tournament, it's a very easy trap to fall into, but it's a trap that I don't think many clubs do fall into these days. And you can't judge a player on the basis of his league form. That said, United did pretty much sign Wout Weghorst just because he got a couple of goals late on against Argentina in Qatar during the 2022 World Cup. But certainly, it is such a substantial investment, and it does rather make a mockery of Sir Jim Ratcliffe's comment in March that United could have gone bust by Christmas, and then here they are investing more than £200 million in 3 forwards. I don't think anybody seriously believed Ratcliffe when he said that at the time. The club have made savings that have given them that extra headroom to sign these players without a major sale. They've obviously brought some money in from sell-on clauses, which is a decent amount, but it's certainly not an amount that could cover a huge signing. I think it's about £20 million, isn't it, from Alvaro Carreras and Anthony Elanga, Maxi Oyedele, and the Jadon Sancho penalty fee. It barely covers a third of the Cunha fee, but Marcus Rashford going on loan for the season, that saves them a lot of money, something like £14 million. And there have been other savings across the club with all the redundancies. The workforce is about 700 now. It's been slashed by roughly a third. So for the people who manage the books carefully, and also the instalments that you pay for signings and how it's staggered, which was a big pro with the Sesko deal from what United told us, that does help, and it all adds up, and all of a sudden the financial situation looks a bit more promising. When in January United refused to pay any money for a striker because they didn't want someone who's going to be short term, and they've gone for someone long term. So they've been consistent there. That would have been, I suppose, a qualm had Ollie Watkins ended up at United. He wouldn't have necessarily been viewed as a long term signing. That said, he turns 30 in December, yes, but he could. You wouldn't be surprised if he went on operating at a decent level for the next 3 years. But Sesko is undeniably long term, given his age. He's only 22, so. I think whether you could call him a youngster now, I think that's that would be not necessarily an area of debate, but maybe it would be kind on him to refer to him as that, given how long he's been known anyway worldwide, and how long he's been operating in the European leagues as well. But that's I think for supporters, we know how they work at this time of year. If they want signings, and I think the three that have come in at United, the three senior signings, are there is undeniable cause for excitement there, and the fact that they are three attackers and they are the front three, and they could be the front three against Arsenal on Sunday, and certainly should be. Again, it's for us, it's a case of fill your boots, really. I mean, there's so much to write about there. Possibly, I just hope it's not 0-0 against Arsenal, but I can't imagine it will be, given the amount of array of attackers on display.
No, it certainly shouldn't be. It should make for a good game. And I think the big thing for me as well, Samuel, is the fact that they've got these three forwards in before the season has actually kicked off. I think that's a really big plus, that they've got everybody in before the
100%.
first kick of the ball. Obviously, we know they need a midfielder. We know there's still the possibility of a goalkeeper, but to strengthen that weakest area from last season before the first ball has been kicked is really positive. Now, obviously, Samuel, a casualty in this attacking rebuild looks like it could be Rasmus Hojlund, left out the starting 11 again, as you mentioned earlier on at the weekend, and now looks like he could be on his way out. You've done the story this morning that he is open to a move to AC Milan, returning to Italy. I think it's just going to be a case where everybody's just got to accept this move was never going to work out in the way everybody hoped to, but it's just a question of whether it be a loan move or a permanent exit for him.
Yeah, and look, he was digging his heels in a little bit when we spoke to him in Chicago, when he said, as far as I'm concerned, there's one plan, that's to stay, competition is good, etc., etc. But we all know how it works, and the reality of the situation is this is a striker who will not be the number 9, then he will not be the starting striker. He might not even be the backup striker. I mean, Amorim is hanging him out to dry now, and I do have some sympathy with Hojlund there, in that he's actually had a relatively decent pre-season. He got a couple of goals against Bournemouth. He started very, very well against West Ham. He was unlucky when he hit the post inside the first minute. His intensity seemed pretty good. He looks in good shape, and that's why he always had to look at it as a win-win situation, that if he stays and he's got an opportunity to play for United, that's good. If he's got an opportunity to get a move away, that's even better, really, because it means more playing time, because United were always going to sign a new striker. But as you said, that deal was just destined to fail from the outset. The ridiculous fee, the fact that Marshall was the support striker, the Case Voss association of him switching agencies. But there were some teammates that just weren't having Hojlund, and I think we discussed it a few weeks ago after the Leeds game, where he had a moan at Diogo Dalot, didn't he, because he didn't get the ball at the time he thought he should have got it, and Dalot was blasé about it, because from his perspective, he's just had a squad number upgrade. He was wearing the captain's armband at the time. He's part of this new leadership team at United, and players aren't daft. They know that they're going to have a new striker to service soon. So why is he going to be unnerved by Rasmus Hojlund having a pop at him? And on Saturday, when he was warming up in the first half, there was a ball on one of the cones, which are ubiquitous now, obviously, to try and keep the flow of the game going. And he just started ball juggling with it. And you don't really see that from players during warm-ups, even in friendlies. They're quite rigorous. They're quite serious with it. But there was something carefree about Hojlund there. And at the time, I thought, is he even going to get on here? And he didn't. And there were five substitutions, I think Amrin made. And those 5 players who came on, you would expect to see all 5 of them in the squad when the transfer window closes. But it's got to the point now with Hojlund where Amrim isn't even concealing his distrust of him or concealing the fact that he wants rid of him. He's played Cunha and Mason Mount ahead of him in the past 2 friendlies. And Bumo went up front for the second half against Fiorentina on Saturday. Hojlund didn't get a kick. It was the first of the 5 friendlies that he didn't play any part in whatsoever. So it is very, very obvious and clear that United want rid of him. And it's quite the about turn, because not only was he considered one of the few untouchables that they didn't want to sell in the 2024 summer transfer window, but it's how protected he's been by people at United. Going back to that story that I did about players being hesitant about passing the ball to him, there were people at United who were angry on his behalf, but also angry that the story was done, because I think they like him. And when he scored against Leicester in March to end a very long goal drought of about 3 months, one of the members of the United press office, I've never seen them celebrate a goal more wildly than when Hojlund put them 1-0 up that night, because they were so chuffed and so delighted for him that he was back on the score sheet and he'd got that monkey off his back. But you just look at the numbers in the cold light of day: 26 goals in 95 Manchester United appearances. You cannot be leading the line for Manchester United for another season. And really, he shouldn't have been leading the line for United at the start. I've said this before, his entry level was Javier Hernandez. He goes into a squad, there's an established striker who's going to be starting ahead of him. He learns his trade and he can gradually become more important. United decided to make Hojlund the starting striker for £72 million. That was 12 times the amount that they paid for Javier Hernandez in 2010. And yeah, the inflation and all this, that, and the other. But ultimately, those 2 strikers they were the same age. They had similar profiles in terms of where they were at career-wise. And that's what Hojlund should have been going into that squad. It should have been as a support striker. And they over-promoted him. He was overpriced. He was over-promoted. And unfortunately for him, it's not ended well. But the opportunity to go to Milan is a good one, because they're rebuilding their squad now. Massimiliano Allegri's back there. It's a familiar area for Hojlund as well. It's only about 40 kilometres away from Bergamo, which of course is where Atalanta are, where his former club. So it's a familiar area. It's a familiar league, and he also needs to be playing regularly because it's the World Cup next year. And he was benched for the last Denmark game. And when you look at his figures for Denmark since he joined United, I think he's only scored twice for Denmark since he signed for Manchester United. So the whole United curse even extends to international football for certain players at times. And Hojlund's only got 1 goal in 16 games for the Denmark national side. So he can't be certain that he's going to keep his place just because he's one of Denmark's most prominent players, and probably the most. I see he must be the most expensive player in Danish football history as well, given the ludicrous fee United paid for him. But he can't rest on these laurels there. And there's a decent history of Danish players at AC Milan as well. So he's got to, as far as I'm concerned, it's a no-brainer for him if the clubs can come to a decent agreement. But I still think that it seems a big ask for Milan to be paying £30 million or whatever it may be to take him off United's hands permanently. I can, from I think months ago, I just looked at Hojlund and thought, if he is to go, and United were planning for him to go, it looks like it's got to be a season-long loan with an option to buy, which in the circumstances, it's palatable enough.
Yeah, and so far, Marcus Rashford has been the only sort of real headline departure. Sam, there's 3 weeks of the window to go as we record this on Monday morning. Alejandro Garnacho, Anthony, Jadon Sancho, of course, remain the big names that United want to move. There'll probably be a cluster of youngsters that go out on loan as well before the bell sounds, but the priority has got to be getting Garnacho, Anthony and Sancho off the books one way or another. Chelsea remain keen on Garnacho. That feels like a permanent deal will happen at some point. But the other two, less of a guarantee that anybody is going to come along and meet the demands United want.
I think it's unlikely that those three will all go on permanent deals. With Anthony, he's created a market for himself. He's back in the Brazil squad. He did very well in La Liga last season, but this is the problem. If you're a player who cost a ludicrous fee, and this is where it's United who are to blame for this, but there are going to be a handful of clubs who can afford him. Going off his value through the PSR calculation, it's something like £32.5 million. There are not going to be any Spanish clubs prepared to pay that. The only Spanish clubs that can really afford that are the big three, and let's face it, none of them want Anthony. So you're looking to Saudi as a possible route if he would even entertain Saudi Arabia, but it's gone really, really quiet with him. And I'm not surprised just because of the circumstances, but we all know come the final week of the transfer window, it's not going to be quiet with him if he's still at United, because they will be trying to move heaven and earth to get him out of the club. There will be a club that comes in for him. I would be unpleasantly surprised if he was still at United, when the transfer window closes, because I mean, I'm not too sure where he'd even get changed at Carrington, because they've got this new dressing room for the emerging talent, which is definitely not Anthony. They've got the first team dressing room where he does have his locker, but let's face it, he's not a first team squad member. So he must know, given the circumstances, that he's got to get out there. He's got to get a move, and I'm sure something will materialise. But whether it will be to United's liking, I don't think anyone can be quite certain of that. With Sancho, I think it's a little bit easier in that his value is nowhere near. I think it's about half of Anthony's, if that, just because of going off the PSR calculation. It's something like £14 million. You would imagine someone, even if it's a Turkish team, they could fork out the money for it. I mean, it is remarkable how United reputationally they damage the perception of a player and damage his worth, because I look at Son Heung-min leaving Tottenham for LAFC for £20 million. That's just mind blowing. Son was a brilliant player, a great player for Tottenham, but he's been in decline for 2 or 3 years. He's not been on it for 2 or 3 years. How the hell Tottenham have got £20 million for him is beyond me. But clearly LAFC must have been so desperate to have him that they've parted with a substantial amount of money to get him, when I imagine he had 1 year left on his contract as well. And were there competitors? I think there was some chatter about Saudi early in the summer, but again, I'm pretty staggered by that. 20 million for Son, and being forked out by an MLS club. MLS clubs don't traditionally pay a lot of money, so. But that just goes to show, like, for all his faults, Daniel Levy, he does drive a hard bargain. He does get good fees for good players or players who used to be good, and he's still up to it with Son, who has been a fading force for a good while. But Tottenham might have even sold him for more money than they paid for him 10 years ago. I can't quite remember how much they paid Bayer Leverkusen, but I'd be surprised if it was 20 million.
Certainly a good fee, no doubt about that. A really handsome fee that they'll be able to reinvest before the end of the window. But before we wrap up, we just want to alert you to another of our podcast sponsors, Saily. Saily is a brand brought to you by NordVPN. It offers you an eSIM service app that you can use abroad if you're in desperate need of an internet connection. You can download Saily in your app store, and for more information, please go to our description box. And on that note, this will mark the end of the latest episode of the Samuel Luckhurst Show. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel or wherever else you get your podcasts from. Also, make sure to leave a like and maybe a comment as well. We'll be back again later in the week to look ahead to Sunday's Premier League opener against Arsenal. Until then, have a great week and take care.